Okay, good afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know, my name is Gabrielle O'Brien. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Senior Project Officer at ADCET. I want to welcome you all to this session called Creating Innovative Assessments Through a UDL Lens with our presenter, Dr. Andy Smidt. For this presentation, please note it's being recorded. If you require captioning, just press the CC button at the bottom, or there is an access to chat through, to captions through the browser. Please turn off your camera and mic sessions bits so that there's not a lot of distraction. We're going to have you put your hands up if you have any questions, or put it into the chat function. Make sure your surrounding environment is quiet, and don't forget to tag us on the socials with UDL Symposium 2023. Over to you, Andy.
Hi, everybody. My name's Andy Smidt. I'm Senior Lecturer at the University of Sydney, and one of my roles is that I am what's called the Faculty Disability Liaison Officer, which means I'm supporting the staff for students in the Faculty of Medicine and Health, where students have an academic plan which contains reasonable adjustments. My role is not supporting the students, but supporting the staff to manage those academic plans. And we've started to do more and more work around UDL, supporting staff to modify their learning and teaching materials, so that what we're looking at is that the number of plans go down, the number of adjustments go down, because we're implementing more UDL. And so several months ago, I did a workshop for people which was about assessments, and the idea was that I was going to be helping people to think through the assessments they've got in their courses and the extent to which those could be modified to be in line with UDL and to be more inclusive. And the feedback that we've got is that actually the students like it, and that the number of plans and adjustments goes down. So I'm going to start off by before we begin today, acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of Australia and recognising their continued connection to land, water and culture. I am currently on the land of the Birrabirragal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are on, and pay respects to their elders past, present and future. So what we're going to be covering today is, what are the challenges in designing assessments for inclusion? We're going to talk about UDL perspectives on assessment, looking at multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. I'm going to give you two examples of assessments that were modified so that you can have a look at those. And we're going to be thinking about how you redesign assessments with UDL in mind. Now, when I planned this as a workshop where there would be breakout rooms and small groups, and you would have time to really focus on thinking about your own teaching and discussing that in groups. But we can't do that within this framework because of issues of having captions and being able to record all the breakout rooms. So I'm going to try and make it interactive, whilst acknowledging that it's probably not quite as interactive as I would have liked. So if we start off by thinking about designing inclusive assessments, what I want to do, this is the engaging part, is I want to get you to type into a Menti. So you can either use your phone and do the QR code on here, and it will bring up on your phone the questions that you can type into, or you can click on that link. And what I'm going to do now is just take us across to my browser, where I have the Menti. Okay. Okay, so now let me know if you can't see it or it's not working, but at the moment I've got that QR code up on the screen. You can click on the link that's been put in the chat, or you can just go into menti.com and type in these numbers, and the numbers are 2854 6010, if that's easier. Now I can see 3 people have got some hearts happening down the bottom there, some thumbs up, so that I know that there are a few people in. That looks like it's working. So I'm going to now go to the first question. There you go. I can see a handful of people coming in. Okay, first question. All right. So what are the challenges to inclusive assessment? I love these scale ones because I like to see it moving on the screen. So what it's doing is it's giving us a score out of 5 based on how many people strongly agree and so on with each of those statements. I'll wait until it's settled down a little bit, and then I'll talk through what are the things that are coming up. Okay. So about half of you, 2.6 out of the sort of 5, have said, I worry about fairness to other students if we're designing inclusive assessments. I worry about having time for the assessments and the marking. And I think that is really, really a feature that comes up regularly, is how am I going to have time to both develop this, and then is it going to be more complex to mark? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Having the technical ability to create innovative assessments is not something that's leaping out at me as something you're hugely worried about. So maybe you do have technical ability. I have too much content to teach and assessment just needs to fit in. I have to say that's one of my things. I'm like, oh my goodness me, how am I going to cover all my content? And my institution has policies that prohibit alternative styles of assessment. Okay, so again, that's sort of in the middle there. So we're not getting anything leaping out at us other than the time for assessments and marking. We're not getting anything that's hugely jumping out as a bigger concern than any of the others. But I think you can understand that, yes, there are challenges to creating assessments because we have to balance all of these other things. Okay, next one. So oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Pause. Okay. Okay, I'm going back to my slides. That's the next question that I'm going to ask when we come back to Menti. There you go. All right. So we're back to my slides. Okay. I'm just going to read on the chat. So I've got, when I'm dictator, content is king will be dethroned. Yeah, I have that problem too. Not just prohibiting inclusive assessment as a challenge, but policies that allow it, expect or encourage it, while separate policies only fund marking support. Yeah, for traditional assessment. I think all of those things are challenges. And I think we work in organizations that are very bureaucratic. There are lots of rules. There are lots of requirements that we have to adhere to. And so getting in there and really thinking about how do I change my assessments is challenging. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the literature. So in terms of assessment and diversity, we know that assessment practices can discriminate against people from different backgrounds. Assessments may be set up to favor students with specific backgrounds or skills, and they may require skills that are not relevant to the topic being assessed. So if what we're doing is we are assessing, I'm just going to give you a random example. We're assessing something in a nursing student, okay, where actually being able to write an essay is not a key part of the job, but being able to write concise notes in a medical file or whatever is a key part of the job. We know that our exams and our assessments may rely on skills that actually aren't essential for the student to acquire. And what we're doing is we're adding additional burden to the assessment, whereas in fact, it may not be. I'm all for adding burden to the assessment if it's a key skill that is part of our learning objectives. It's something that students in this particular discipline or this particular course need. But if we can move away from everybody having to write essays, etc., I think that's really important. So a lot of what I am taking from here comes from a paper about reimagining exams and how do assessment adjustments impact on inclusion. And it comes from Perth and from the NCSEHE organization. And so I'm really just summarizing some of that. Okay, so what they said is exams and other high-stake assessments that are time-limited can act as barriers to success for some students in higher education. Although required by Australian law, adjustments do not necessarily lead to equitable academic outcomes, nor do they always address students' actual access requirements. Thanks, Joanna, for putting that link in. A system which focuses only on making reactive accommodations is likely to become overwhelmed as diverse students increasingly participate. So what we know is if we have 10% of the cohort that need an adjustment, that starts to become really time consuming. And then we're wanting to say, well, could we actually design from an inclusive perspective at the outset so that that burden is balanced out? And rather than continuing to view disability as a problem to address at an individual level, a shift to focus on inclusive assessment design may also hold promise for a broader range of diverse students. This was a word cloud that they brought out of how have assessments made you feel. And I think when we look at that word cloud, we can see that in the middle, students find assessment stressful, that makes them anxious and frustrated, as well as overwhelmed and fearful and angry and challenged, and inspired is good, okay, and excited. But many of those other words are the things that aren't conducive to doing your best and demonstrating that you've actually acquired the learning objectives of this particular course. So what I want to, I really like the fact that the theme here was what, why, and how, and I've added a couple. I have who, what, where, how, why, etc. Okay. So I want to start off with what, okay, what is the UDL perspective on assessment? So I'm starting off by looking at providing multiple means of engagement. Students do well when they are motivated and enjoy learning. And material clearly needs to be engaging, but also linked to why they are learning this material. Some learners thrive on spontaneity and novelty, while others are disengaged and scared by those aspects and prefer a predictable routine. Some enjoy working alone, while others prefer to work with peers. If what we're looking at is to say we want our learning material and therefore our assessment material to be engaging, we have to provide it in ways that will be engaging for different types of students. And that means we need to provide material in multiple ways because our students are individuals and they have multiple different ways of valuing learning. So how do we apply this to assessment specifically? So what we can do in terms of multiple means of engagement is we can make the goals and the purpose clear and authentic. We want to design for choice and for agency when possible. We want to foster collaboration, so getting our students to work in teams, but not necessarily assessing them in teams. And we want to support student self-assessment and reflection. When we move on to multiple means of representation, I'm just looking at this image over here. I have a very nice image on this screen, which is a keyboard, and it's got a blue key on it with a wheelchair image, and it says accessibility, and it's blue. And my image of multiple means of representation, as per the rubric that you all know, is purple. And I'm looking at that and thinking, there's something not quite right about those color choices. And I think that kind of illustrates, it just struck me right now, but it kind of illustrates how the images that we use, the colors that we use, can be challenging for students. And if a student spends 20 seconds processing what that image is and why it's a different color from another part of the page, that's cognitive load that is not necessarily helpful to them. So we might think it's very easy to go, oh yes, we need to be accessible. We had a fantastic keynote that was all about accessibility. And it's very easy to say, yes, we can make things accessible. We can spend lots of time making sure that our PowerPoints and our handouts and the captions work, the sort of mechanics, if you like, of accessibility. But a key aspect of assessment is to ensure that all students understand what's required of them. So instead of just focusing on those mechanics, if you like, of the learning and teaching material, we need to find ways to underline for students and to allow them to understand what is required of them in this task. Okay. Is XYZ tool accessible? Well, it depends what you're doing with it. Yes, absolutely. But if what we do is we spend the time to do the things that we know are important, and that's great. It's the captioning and the accessibility tools. All good. What I'm suggesting in terms of multiple means of representation is we need to apply that to the instructions for assessment. So I do things like I make a video where I talk about what it is that's going to be involved in this assessment, and I work through the rubric, doing that visually as well as giving them the written rubric and finding ways to represent that in different ways. So creating a range of resources that illustrate for students. So giving them exemplars, giving them both good and less good exemplars so that we can critique them, becoming familiar with the rubric. It could be that we make a video, it could be that we use an annotated exemplar paper, a list of frequently asked questions. One of the things I do with my students is I give them a Padlet for each assessment item, and I give them all of the questions, because Padlet can be anonymous, from last year as well as this year. And I say, start off by reading the questions that last year's students had, and let's talk about those questions and whether or not I've changed the assessment to improve on some of those, and do those questions still apply? So that sense of allowing them to ask questions, but also to reflect on the questions from the previous cohort and so on. One of the things we want to do is reduce cognitive effort. And I talked about that a moment ago in terms of engagement, but it also applies to multiple means of representation. Sometimes I think it takes students more time and more stress in understanding what's required of them in this assessment than they do actually writing the assessment task. And I think if we can reduce cognitive load about understanding assessments, that will reduce stress. Okay, so moving on to action and expression. So we know, and this is the one that most obviously, I think for all of us, jumps out and says, okay, so if we're designing assessments, we need to have multiple ways that students can demonstrate that they've understood the learning content. What do we want them to do? Do we want them to do a presentation? Do we want them to do a written assignment, a video, or an illustration? Could we give them more than one option for demonstrating the learning objectives, and provide them with choice in how they do that? For this to be successful, your rubrics need to focus on the achievement of the learning objectives rather than things like grammar and spelling and language, unless these are learning objectives. If they are learning objectives, I am a speech pathologist. I am teaching speech pathologists, and they need to have excellent grammar and spelling and language. That is a learning objective, okay? Therefore, there are some marks in my rubrics, okay, that measure those things. But if I wasn't a speech pathologist, and I do teach other units of study where this is not something that I particularly focus on, it may not be a learning objective. So we need to be really clear about that. Okay, so I'm going to play you a YouTube video, and so I'm going to swap screens again. And here it is. Okay, so this is from Mohawk College. What I like about this video, let me make it bigger screen, but not full screen, hoping you can see that. Have a listen. So Mohawk's in Canada.
My name is Lisa Pender, and I am a full-time faculty member in the Department of Liberal Studies, and I specialize in sociology and aging. And I've been using UDL for about 2 years now. There's lots of ways I implement UDL into my courses. One of the ways I do that is by providing options for students when it comes to not only the way they are assessed in the course, but also how they are going to submit their assessments in the course. So for instance, in one of my assignments, they have a discussion board post. And in terms of what they decide to post, whether it's commenting on somebody else's post or summarizing a bunch of posts that came before them, it's just offering them options as well as how to submit it. A lot of students are really comfortable speaking. And so if they want to submit an audio file, that's fine for me. Just giving the students that option to do that makes, for instance, our international students who have maybe some English barriers, it gives them an option to submit an audio file where they are going to best represent how they know the material of that subject. Because UDL doesn't have a lot of prescribed rules, it has allowed me to sort of customize my course every single weekend, my course is laid out in what I call audio format. So they'll have the lecture with audio as well as access to the notes without audio. And then also they will have a handout that I give them that's a bit of a fill in the blank, and students can follow along with the lecture as they're listening to it and write down notes. And that helps offer different ways to engage with the course material. I think when we are removing barriers and adding options to the course, whether it's an assignment or how to submit an assignment, for instance, it makes the student more accountable. And therefore, students have to take a responsibility in how they learn. And it's much more self-directed. That is the best part about UDL. It puts the learning onus back on the student, and they have to learn how they best learn and then figure out how they're going to show what they know in a course.
For more information on UDL,
So it's a very short video, but she says it very nicely and really illustrates that they're, you know, you're setting that up, that why we do it, that we're giving the students autonomy and so on in their learning, and that whole focus on how we make assignments. I really liked it. So we've got this idea. We know that there are reasons for modifying our assessments in terms of UDL, that we can think in terms of multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, as well as multiple means of action and expression. But where do we start? And I think for educators, this is often a really big problem with UDL. They feel like they have to start somewhere. They have to start, and it has to be perfect from the very beginning. And I liked this idea of saying, where do we start? We can start with one small thing. Okay, so if we have students and they don't understand what it is that they're doing when they're doing assignments, there's a quiz, they do the quiz. There's a quiz, they do that quiz. There's an essay, we're going to do that essay. There's an exam, we're going to prepare that exam. What that feels like, I'm watching this young man on the screen treading water, that feels exhausting to me. It feels like I'm busy and I'm doing things, but I don't have an understanding of where it's going and why I'm doing it. And there is this sense of just keep swimming, and that our courses sometimes do feel like you just keep swimming. Whereas if our students know what it is they've got to do, where it is they're going, what the goal is, then that feeling of swimming towards something, I think, is more manageable. So the key points, if we're thinking about where do we start, I would say the very first thing you want to do is to provide students with choices. And that needs to apply at both formative level and summative level. And before you start to choose the assessment methods for your course, you need to start by considering that assessment is not just a measure of what students know. It has the capacity to shape a student's attitude, goal setting, and engagement. I don't know, I mean, I'm asking you and I can't see your faces to get answers, but, you know, that feeling of in week one, you've got a full room, there are, you know, 180 students in the room, and by week 3, you're down to about half, and by week 6 or 7, you're down to about a third. And I find that really frustrating. And it doesn't matter for me whether it's online or it's in person, it's on Zoom. It's that sense that they stop coming, okay? And they stop coming perhaps partly because of their engagement, their attitude, their goal setting. I think that sense of one of the units that I teach, there were a core group of students like this year who came every single week. And one week I wasn't well and I didn't see them, and they came back the next week and they said, we needed our Andy stabilizing moment. The week felt really out of, you know, and it's that sense of you're coming to the class, you're coming to be grounded, to ask those questions, to feel motivated, to know what your goals are, and that my role is to keep you on that track. So I think assessment is part of that. I think it's not just it's not just about testing what they've learned. And so I think we have to understand that the power that assessment has. So the first thing you have to understand is who your students are. Now, I apologize that you may not all have this, but at my university, one of the things that we have is this, okay? I don't know if you can see it, it's a bit small, and I don't know exactly how it's generated. I can find out if anybody's really interested. We have something called Knowing Your Students, and it tells us for each class the gender, the age, domestic, international, their home language, where they were born, their age, and so on. Understanding your cohort, however you do that, however you manage to find out that information about your cohort and understanding who your students are, is really important. And that sense of, I do something in my first week of semester where I ask students to find a picture that represents themselves. And I invariably find one of me looking tired or frantic. And I ask them, and we get dolphins, and we get frazzled hair, and we get happy puppies and all sorts of things, images that represent them, and then sharing that, discussing, getting students to identify who they are as learners and what they bring to the course, and really understanding your students is vital, I think, in terms of really thinking about where you want to start with assessment. So step 2, we've thought about who are our students. Step 2 is to stop and say, why am I assessing this at this point? So this is my why. Okay, we're going to go back to Menti. Okay, so the same Menti you had a moment ago, but I now get to go on to the next slide. And here we go. So I can go on to the next one. And I want to say, so what purpose might an assessment serve? So we've got assessment for learning, we've got assessment to check knowledge and practice, assessment for or as learning, scaffolding, progress check, not simple hard measure of skill or knowledge acquisition, opportunity for feedback. I see that both ways, actually. I see that as me giving feedback to the students, but students also giving feedback to me on what they know, what they understand so far. Assessment in UDL serves various purposes, including measuring student progress, identifying learning barriers, and informing instructional adjustments. That's very formal. Yet learn by doing, applying knowledge and skills to a new situation, scaffolding progress, and using learning for future improvements, having a point of focus, all of those things. And I think sometimes assessment for me is just making sure that they're keeping up with the content. Because if we're doing a little bit every 2 or 3 weeks and I'm checking where they are, even if those carry very small marks, it means that when we get to the bigger assignment later, they're not having to go all the way back to material we talked about in week 1, making sure they've understood that content early because we're going to build on it. Confidence in knowing depth of what we want them to know, developing skills to assess, to apply in future roles. Yeah, so there's a whole load of different things that we do and purposes that assessments serve. Okay, so I'm coming back to my slides. Okay, so how do we then map? So we have to map our assessments, and we're thinking about constructive alignment. We have to map our assessments to the learning outcomes, to what those learning activities will be, and to the assessment tasks. And of course, what we're thinking about at this point is the assessment tasks and how they map through. So we need to not just have tasks that we say, okay, so, and you know, universities who say we should have a mid-semester exam and we should have, oh, you can't see my slides. Hold on. Thank you very much. That's something strange going on. Is that better? Yep. Okay, cool. Sorry. So what we've got here is this idea of mapping. So we know about constructive alignment. That's something that we get taught as educators, I think, that we're mapping our learning outcomes with our learning activities and then our assessment tasks. We need to think about the fact that our assessment tasks need to link to our learning outcomes, but they also need to serve all those other purposes that we just typed into the Padlet. Into the Menti, I apologize. So this comes from a really interesting paper, and I went to a session earlier about mental health. I don't know if Jackie is here, but this paper that comes out of ADCET HE I found was really interesting around thinking about curriculum design for mental health and well-being. And so we do have all these different types, and we said some of these things, okay? So the purpose, to support learning towards summative assessment, to evaluate and formally record levels of attainment, to guide learning effort and focus. So we want to actually see that students are putting in the effort, if you like, to the assignments that they're creating. And there's a whole list of them. The idea that we have all of these different types of assessment and we can describe them, but what we really need to know is what is their purpose, because if we don't know that, we can't support the students to know that, and then we end up a bit like Dory from Finding Nemo, where we're just treading water, where we're saying just keep swimming, rather than having an understanding of where it is that we're going and what the purpose of the assessment is. Okay, so the one thing I asked you on that slides thing that went back and forth was about marking load. Okay, so we have to think about how am I going to mark this work? My university has a formula. I suspect that yours do too. Mine has a 1 hour of marking per semester per student. So if I have 100 students in my course, I get 100 hours of time that is allocated to marking in the workload formula. So when we have things that are more engaged and we want to give really good quality feedback, it's challenging to do that. So I'm going to give you these 2 examples. Okay, so I've got 2 examples of things that I changed in my units of study, and I want to talk about why I did that, what I did, but also the impact on marking. So our weekly quizzes, so this unit of study that I took over, it had a weekly quiz, which was to read an article and answer 5 questions on it. The purpose of the assessment was purely to make sure that the students were doing the readings. Okay, and the students were fairly unengaged with it. They didn't particularly like it. They did it, but there was a whole load of, you know, article on one side of the screen, quiz on the other side of the screen. And therefore that they weren't reading it. They were doing a word search. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the Menti. And we're going to talk about weekly quizzes and why we might do those. Okay, I'm coming back to my Menti. Okay. So why do you or might you use weekly quizzes? Do you use weekly quizzes? You're not a teacher. Okay, so did you, when you were a student, did you have weekly quizzes? What do you think they were about? Okay, so check understanding, diagnostic, attendance check, yes, practice, recall, enforcing reading, motivate students. So there are some really good, solid reasons why we use those weekly quizzes. The question for me, and it hasn't come up in there. Okay, one of the things that comes up when I usually discuss this with people is that they're multiple choice, they can be self-marking, and actually I need the students to be on top of this learning material, and the reason I'm using these is because it's a 0 hour in terms of marking. I'm going to ask you, you can type into the chat if you want to on that one. I'm interested, is that something you've come across? Yep. Lorraine says, yep. Yeah, and for me, that's a kind of like, that's not the best reason. Yes, I get that it's doing all those other things. It is checking engagement and it is checking they've understood and so on. But for me, the major reason, okay, so this is what I wanted to show you. I'm coming back to my slides. Okay, so I had a slide where I was asking people about doing quizzes, and I sort of asked them these things. What was the purpose of doing it? Is it to demonstrate understanding of key material? Is it to encourage students to keep up with the material? Is it to ensure that students have done the pre-reading? They scale well in our maths classes, absolutely. Is it linked to workload for staff? Does feedback on quizzes support ongoing learning and self-monitoring? Do they add up to a significant number of marks? Are they timed or untimed? I also found them annoying as a student, but it did keep me engaged and reminded me to keep up. Now, for me, Gabrielle, I kept up. I didn't feel engaged. I didn't like them. I've got 3 young adult children, only one of whom is left at university, currently at university, but the others have been through university, and they go, oh, I've got a compulsory quiz, Mum. I've just got to go upstairs and I've got to do this quiz. And it's like, it's annoying, it's irritating, it's not motivating, and it's not for them. It's not about learning. It's about ticking the box. It's about the teacher ticking the box that I've done what they've asked me to do. Okay, so what we think about the purpose of quizzes, it could be of learning. So we're measuring their learning. So the quiz could be summative. It could be for learning. So it could be formative, or it could be as learning, not so much quizzes. Yeah, I agree. Easy marks, they cause a lot of stress. And this unit of study that I took over had 5 marks a week for 12 quizzes. Okay. And when I worked out how much of a percentage of the mark that was, I was really unhappy with that, because I felt it was easy marks for them, but it was also somehow disengaged learning for them. And I wanted them to be engaged. Okay. So what did I do? So some of these examples actually the Mohawk video covered. I'm going to skip past these and I can come back if you want me to in a minute. All right, so what I did was I actually took one quiz. So I took 8 weeks, and 4 of them I kept the quizzes, but I made the quizzes harder. Okay, 4 of them I made them activities, and I said this was an entirely online course. And I said, you would be doing these activities anyway, because the activities are the activities of learning. Okay, so the activities were the things they needed to do each week as learning, because it was an entirely online course and there was very little didactic teaching from me. And I said to them, you get to choose. I want you to go away and I want you to make something that explains the concept of person first language, which was one of the things I was teaching them. And so I said to them, you can make anything you like. Some of them made a postcard. Some of them made a children's drawing. There were all kinds of different things. Some of them made a Powtoon video. This student, who gave me permission to share, made a TikTok video. At this point, I have to confess, I did not know what a TikTok video was. I had to ask one of my children, but have a look at what she did.
Hey guys, today I just want to tell you a little bit
Can you hear
about
it?
person first. So person first language means acknowledging that a person with disability is a person first before the disability. It shows respect and allows people to recognize what people with disability have to offer and ensure that they are seen as people instead of being labeled by their disability. Similarly, when talking about people who do not have disabilities, instead of using terms like normal or regular, we use language such as people without disability. It is always best to ask someone how they identify first, but if you are unsure, person first language.
Okay, I think the whole video was 2 minutes long. Okay, how long did it take me, okay, or it wasn't me, actually it was somebody else, but to mark that? 2 minutes, because I've got a rubric on the screen, I've got the video on the other half of the screen, I can watch it, I can tick. And the rubric was really straightforward. It says, do you demonstrate that you've understood the concept? Have you used accessible whatever? And so it was really engaging and they loved it. Now they got to spend, instead of spending an hour and a half reading and preparing for some multiple choice questions or writing a post in a discussion forum, they actually got to make something, and they all made really different things. And they are amazing. The person who marks this course for me comes every time she marks me, she goes, oh my God, they're so wonderful. Your students, they're so fantastic. And it is like, we see their faces, we connect with them, we see their ideas. And it does not take any longer, probably, than setting up the multiple choice quiz. Okay, so if you're going to be giving quizzes that are for marks, okay, then at a key point in the semester, after they've had a period of time to learn and understand the concepts, we want to build competence beforehand from previous formative assessments, and we want to reward those who've completed all the formative quizzes. So if you're going to use formative quizzes, okay, throughout the semester, my advice is that the students who complete them all, some of those questions are actually repeated in the one that's summative, so that they are rewarded for having done the early ones, and that formative ones don't have to be marked. Those self-assessment multiple choices quizzes don't have to carry marks, but they're rewards in different places. The reward here is that if you've done them all, particularly if you've done them all a couple of times, when you get to the marked quiz, you will have already thought about those answers. If my goal in teaching is that students think about and understand these concepts, repeating the quizzes until they get 100%, but it carries no marks, is learning. It is thinking about the concepts. Therefore, I'm happy that I'm going to give them that when I get to those marked quizzes that are for higher marks. Students in my feedback, they loved this activity, and there's a question here, did they have any trouble with the open-endedness? They didn't. And I gave them loads and loads of feedback and scaffolds and descriptions and explanations. I also ran a drop-in every single week where they could come and talk to me about what the task involved. But they loved it. And one of the things they wrote about this unit, that reason they loved it, was there were no surprises. Students like to know what's coming, and they like to know that what you say you're going to be looking for are the things that you're looking for. Okay, so that was my first example, which was I changed weekly quizzes, okay, for weekly activities that were marked. So they got 4 quizzes and 4 weekly activities that were marked. I've just shown you one of them, which was to explain person first language in some way or another. And they could choose to write, they could choose to whatever. Okay. Assessment task 2 was an essay. So writing an essay involves a range of skills that may not be key learning objectives, such as formulating an argument, grammar and spelling, essay writing style, and so on. Now, they might be learning objectives, and that's fine. If essay writing style is a learning objective, then of course you're going to teach or provide links to materials to teach the skills you're assessing, okay, which is the essay writing. If you're examining the content and essay writing is not a skill you're measuring in this unit of study, what alternative ways could you use to assess their understanding of content? And so we looked at things like authentic writing examples. I am from a healthcare background, and so we looked at writing notes in a clinical note writing style rather than writing an essay. Preparing a presentation that you deliver in the workplace. So my students get asked to prepare a presentation that they would give to teachers in a school about a particular topic, and they have to imagine. We have to imagine what it is that they are would be doing and keep it authentic. Create a flyer or a product about information, and create a website that consumers might access. Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing that I got them to do, and then there's a few questions that I will come and answer in the chat. So this replaced an essay, which was about intervention, okay? And so what this group were asked to do was, again, different group of students, but they were asked to make a resource. Some made a whole website, some made a video. This one is a video that she made, and I want you to just have a look at how untechnological it was, and yet how effective. Have a look.
So, a child in your class is seeing a speech pathologist. The speaker has recommended a pictorial exchange communication system to help them communicate, and you have been delegated a communication partner. But what does it mean to be a communication partner? How does this system work? And is it really going to help your student? Before we talk about PECs, let's remind ourselves about AAC.
Okay.
Alternative or
let me just skip along to where there we go. Have a look at this.
You'll need at least 3 to get started. The reinforcers should be things the student spends a lot of time with, things you know that exert effort to get. The next step is to create labeled picture symbols for each reinforcer. Phase 1 requires 2 adults. One acts as the communication partner and the other is the prompter. The goal of this phase is for the student to learn how to make a request. The communication partner entices the student by playing with the reinforcer in front of them.
So you can see what she's done is she's created a video. It's an explanation for a teacher. I think what she's trying to do is to show what she would do live with a teacher. It's not that she would send the video to the teacher, but she's managed to demonstrate that she understood it, that she could explain it in accessible language to the teacher. And so for me, again, and the students absolutely loved doing these rather than writing an essay about one particular intervention approach that they might have learned about. So Gabby, shall I go to the Q&A now?
Yeah, we might ask a couple because there's some relevant questions. Mimi asked about an essay which needs 4,000 written words. Will it mean that a submitted audio assessment will need the same number of words to be valid? If not, what would be the equivalent basis?
So for me, if I was, again, so my students, I do things like I say, you can make a YouTube video, you can make a podcast, and I give them a word limit that feels like it's authentic, if you like. And And so if the task is to explain something to a parent, I say, well, you would normally explain this in about 10 minutes. So if you're going to make a recording of you explaining something to a parent, then it would be about 10 minutes long. I don't have 4,000 word anythings. So I think I tend to use those much shorter things so that what they're doing is synthesizing down to shorter arguments rather than those very long-winded responses. And I think if you wanted to translate 4,000 words into, I think it would end up being a 45-minute recording. And I think that would be overwhelming for them and overwhelming to Mark. So for me, what I've learned about for the person first one, for example, is that a 2-minute or 3-minute activity if they can explain it in 2 or 3 minutes, I know they've really understood it. There's a lot of work that gets to 2 coherent minutes. It might have started off with 10 less coherent minutes, and by tightening it up and making it shorter, I also get them to share them within the class, to give feedback to each other, so they have an opportunity. They can give it to me for early feedback if they want to. They're going, it's now 5 minutes long and I need to cut. What can I cut? And so we do a lot of that sharing and talking as well.
Great, thanks. Another question we have is, how can we ensure that different modes of representation offer students genuine and equitable options? I've noticed that in some courses, students are allowed to submit an audio file on the grounds that, quote unquote, this is inclusive. But if the assessment is an essay, this is essentially a written genre, so it's different and inauthentic to use a spoken text. For me, a more genuine choice would be equivalent oral or visual genre, like a presentation or a speech.
It depends on the task and what your learning objective is. If what we're trying to do, if this was students who were law students perhaps, or English students were writing and forming coherent arguments, written arguments, then I would be saying absolutely we need to keep it as the genre that is about the way in which this material is important. I guess what I'm saying is that we need to think about what is the purpose of the assessment. And it's not, what I've discovered is that some students will far prefer to write, and then I read what they've written as a written format, and actually it's harder for me to understand what it is that they're actually saying. Forcing them to get it to a verbal argument actually makes them clearer about what it is they want to say. Academic integrity, Mimi.
Yes.
Okay, well, look, academic integrity and AI is the big thing. We don't know, audio recordings, absolutely somebody else could have written it for them, and absolutely they could be reading it. Okay, somehow I got muted, I apologize. So academic integrity in AI is going to continue to be an issue. The only way you can do it is if they do it live. They could make the audio recording, play it live, and then you could ask them questions to make sure that they've at least understood it. But I don't know how else you're going to manage that. And that's an ongoing issue.
And I think one more question we have, and then I'll let you go back to the session, is did students have similar options for courses which followed in the program so that they could develop the same information and academic literacies throughout the student life cycle?
So I'm coming from a perspective of universal design for learning, not about modifications for students with a disability at this point. I'm talking about the fact that for the whole cohort, what I'm wanting to do is create assessments that they enjoy, that are easy to mark, that are meaningful and authentic, that maintain academic integrity, and that, aren't written versions of something. And the number of times I sit there and I read a paragraph and I think I actually need to read that again, and then I think I still don't understand the point the student's making, because it's written in flowery language. They've kind of grasped the idea that if we write academically, it's got to have this formal language, but when you tease it apart, And the academic integrity thing here too, they don't just copy, they copy one sentence and then another sentence and put them together in something that doesn't quite make sense. So I think there are real issues in determining whether students have understood the content. And I think we have to find ways that allow students to show the best that's right for them. Okay, so by offering choice, we say which mode for you would allow you to demonstrate your learning. And that's what I think we need to be doing. Okay, I am going to move us along because we are close to time. Let me just go away. Next one. There we go. Okay, writing a rubric. So I'm not going to put my slide up on the screen for this one, but your rubric does need to focus. And so what I've done here is this is one of my rubrics. Okay, so what we've got down this side is the content. So this was make a resource. Okay, the content of the resource. Does it contain incorrect information right through to its, you know, its thorough coverage, it's synthesized, it demonstrates. So this is the content. Okay, the resource you've created, does it demonstrate you've understood the thing you made the resource about? Then length or duration. So was it over the word limit? Was it too long? Was it too short? Was it recordings of videos and podcasts? Often they speak very, very fast. So I want to capture some of that. Accessibility, parent-friendly language, spelling, grammar, plain English, free of jargon, okay? And then they get 2 marks for their presentation. So if they've presented it beautifully, okay, and they've put in a lot of effort, I want to give them marks for that. Now, they're only getting 2 marks for it, but we want to reward the effort that students have put into creating something. And actually, in my profession, that's the thing that's going to help them the most, is creating materials that are engaging for their clients to work with, or for the parents of the children that they're working with. I think I'm going to probably stop at that point. I did have some Padlets for us to think about your own assessments. And what I might do, if you can paste the links for me into the chat, but feel free to go away and type into those Padlets. There are 3 of them. I said, pick a color. Do you want to be blue, green, or purple? It was really, how are you feeling today? And I do this with students. Go into each one of them, pick whichever one you like. And then there's some questions in there about what do you do? And if you want to, use that space to play with some ideas, and I will comment on some of the things that are in there, I'm really happy to do that. But I think I might finish up at that point because I think we're just about on time.
Thank you so much, Andy, for presenting that today. I think it's given people a lot of food for thought. And as I've said before, we'll have all Andy's materials and the recording available after the symposium. We really encourage you to come on Thursday as well, because there'll be more fantastic sessions, and our keynote, Dr. Thomas Tobin. Thank you so much for those who came today. We hope that you've really gained a lot of knowledge and improvements in your practice, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.